Thank you for stopping by at the Movie Marquee. Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Hello, this is Miracle Max. I just wanted to comment on how good I liked your episode. It was wonderful. It reminded me of a mutton, lettuce, and tomato sandwich with the mutton sliced oh so thin, just the way I like. It was delicious. I just want to say how much I loved your episode on Rob Reiner, The Princess Bride.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action.
Hello and welcome to the Movie Marquee. Today on the Marquee, we'll be finishing our spotlight on films by Rob Reiner with the 1995 film, The American President. With me are my co-host, Eric.
You know, the time it'll take you to go from presidential girlfriend to cocktail party joke can be measured on an egg timer.
And Ted.
Sure glad he cleared that up because the crowd was about to buy some Amway products.
And my name is Ken. America isn't easy. America is advanced citizenship. You gotta want it bad, because it's gonna put up a fight. It's gonna say, you want free speech? Let's see you acknowledge a man whose words make your blood boil, who's standing center stage and advocating at the top of his lungs that which you would spend a lifetime opposing at the top of yours.
Whew, sounds like Ken's running for president.
Ken 2024.
You and everybody else.
Okay, Eric, do you have the details about The American President?
Yeah, let's talk about it. This movie was released on November 17th, 1995, with a budget of about $62 million. It grossed about $108 million domestically. It's directed, of course, by Rob Reiner and written by the great Aaron Sorkin. Stars Michael Douglas as President Andrew Shepard, Annette Bening as Sidney Ellen Wade, Martin Sheen as A.J. McInerney, Michael J. Fox as Louis Rothschild, and Richard Dreyfuss as Senator Rumson.
Thank you, Eric. What about the reviews of the movie?
Well, the reviews of this one are pretty positive. Empire says it's a commercial offering with classy performances, snappy, intelligent writing, and good old-fashioned romance turned up to 11. Nice little Rob Reiner reference there. Rotten Tomatoes certified fresh at 91%. Common Sense Media says this is a delightful romantic comedy. Janet Maslin of the New York Times says a widowed president finds love with lobbyists. Capital fun. And of course, Roger Ebert gives this one 4 stars. And I'm going to read a paragraph here from his review, which I think sums up this movie perfectly. Roger Ebert says, watching The American President, I felt respect for the craft that went into it. The flawless recreation of the physical world of the White House, the smart and accurate dialogue, the manipulation of the love story to tug at your heartstrings. It is a film with a liberal political point of view, and that takes nerve. It would have been easier to create an identikit president with manufactured issues. This is a great entertainment movie, one of the year's best films.
I agree with a lot of that. We're going to actually discuss quite a bit of what he's saying there. That's
why I read that. I thought that was a great lead into our conversation.
It really is. I mean, I make no bones about it. He's my favorite, and that's part of the reason why.
So, Ted, do you have the plot for The American President?
The American President tells the story of President Andrew Shepard, played by Michael Douglas, a widower with a teenage daughter who is seeking re-election for president. With a high approval rating with the American people, it appears that President Shepard is on pace to win an easy re-election. The president and his staff are eager to pass a crime bill that has the appearance of being tough on crime, but in reality stands for nothing more than a big win during an election year. Also on the president's docket is a clean energy bill. A powerful PAC, or Political Action Committee, has pressured the president to include a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. The president is set on sending the energy bill to Congress with a 10% reduction in an apparent concession to ensure passage before Congress. The PAC that is lobbying the president for the higher restrictions of greenhouse gases decides that they must exert intense pressure on the president. To put that pressure on the president, they decide to bring in Sidney Ellen Wade, a high-powered environmental lobbyist who has a reputation for playing hardball in negotiations. During a lunch meeting with the president's chief of staff, A.J. McInerney, who's played by Martin Sheen, the president makes an unannounced but planned appearance to try to solidify the 10% number. The president takes special notice of Sydney and realizes that he is attracted to her, but also impressed by her tenacity. Being impressed with Sydney, the president decides to make a deal. She has to get the votes that seem unattainable, and then he will send the bill to Congress with the 20% number that Sydney and the PAC are seeking. The president is informed that his sister cannot join him for a state dinner for the newly elected president and first lady of France. President Shepherd decides that he would like to ask Sydney to the dinner. When asked, Sydney accepts the invitation and attends the dinner as the president's date. Sydney quickly is found that she is the only one seated at the table that can speak French, and in doing so helps the president make the French president feel more at ease. Amazed at her versatility and beauty, he asks Sydney to dance, and they dance in front of the entire dinner party. Sydney and the president soon begin a serious relationship that is under scrutiny from the president's advisors and Sydney's boss. As their relationship grows, the president's approval rating starts to plummet, and with the plummeting of the approval rating, the hopes of passing the crime bill dwindle. Also putting pressure on the president is a Republican senator, Senator Rumson, played by Richard Dreyfuss, who is planning on running for president against Shepherd. He moves quickly to assassinate the character of Sydney and President Shepherd. President Shepherd, to the consternation of his advisors, refuses to fight back against the accusations of Senator Rumson. As the State of the Union address quickly approaches, it becomes clear to the president and his advisors that the only way to try to salvage his approval rating is to pass the crime bill. The crime bill is destined to fail, but the energy bill, through the hard work of Sydney, has gained enough votes to pass with the 20% reduction that President Shepherd promised. The president's advisors make a plea to him to sacrifice the energy bill, and then in sacrificing the energy bill, the president will gain the votes needed to pass the crime bill. President Shepherd reluctantly makes the decision to sacrifice the energy bill. By sacrificing the energy bill, the PAC fires Sydney, and she finds out that President Shepherd sold her out to pass the crime bill. In anger, she breaks up with President Shepherd and tells him that she lost her faith in him as a president as well. The morning of the State of the Union address, President Shepherd makes an impromptu appearance during the morning press conference. Before the assembled presidential press corps, President Shepherd declares that he will put the energy bill up to Congress with the 20% reduction. He also says that he will scrap the crime bill as it is written and will present a new crime bill that actually stands up to the ideals that he used to run for president. Then the president takes on Senator Rumson and defends Sydney's character. After the press conference, Sydney meets President Shepherd in the Oval Office. They kiss and they make up.
Thank you, Ted, for the plot of The American President. When did you see The American President? Or when The American President came out, did you have any expectations? Did you want to see this movie? Or was this something that you just eventually watched because it was on TV?
I honestly don't remember the first time I saw this movie. I remember it coming out in 95. I don't really remember really wanting to see it because honestly, it really was advertised as kind of like a chick flick. I do remember that. It was kind of like more of a
chick flick?
Yeah, chick flick, I said it. A hardcore love story. And I was kind of like, I didn't really want to see it. But I think I probably saw it on video sometime later because I know I did not see it in the theater.
How about you, Ted?
I'm kind of like Eric. I know I didn't see it in the theater. I can't exactly pinpoint the first time I actually saw the movie. It would have been on video. I guarantee you that. And it's a good possibility that my parents probably rented it from Blockbuster or our local video store because all of these actors are actors that my parents really enjoyed and I do as well. This would have been a movie we probably watched as a family, amazingly enough. I mean, most of the movies that we've talked about up to this point, I have seen probably with myself or with friends. But this would have probably been one that we would have watched as a family. Being a kind of a presidential history junkie, as I am, it would have definitely piqued my interest.
Well, I saw this movie in the theater. I actually was very excited about seeing this film, mainly because me and Ted love to talk about history. And I just felt like watching a movie about a president sounded like a cool idea. There was actually a lot of movies out in the 90s about presidents. And for me, this was my favorite one probably that came out. So I was very happy with going to see it in the theater. And then it got nominated, I believe, for Best Picture.
For the Golden Globes, not for the Academy Awards.
Oh, not for the Academy Awards? For me, I was very happy to go see it. I looked forward to it. I think it's good to actually see a Michael Douglas film where he's not trying to kill his wife, or his wife is not trying to kill him, or his lover's not trying to kill him, or whatever the case may be. He just seemed to be in this rut where he was always in this type of Fatal Attraction type of movies at that time. I think it's a nice change of pace for him.
Well, he was a romantic lead in the early 80s as well. He had Romancing the Stone. Those were before his big turn, I guess you could say, as a villain, because it would have been after those two movies that when he got the Academy Award-winning role of Gordon Gekko at Wall Street. And that's when he really became a villain, because he's known for years afterwards of playing the villain role.
Villain role, or of a guy that's in a situation that's
right.
Like he's cheating on his wife, and
right. He's definitely not sympathetic in Fatal Attraction.
Ironically, one of my just comes up. We're talking Michael Douglas now, but one of my father's favorite movies of all time is Black Rain.
Huh.
He loves Black Rain. On. Yeah. So I've watched that probably about 100 times.
That's an interesting movie for Michael Douglas. I was really part of that, where he was, for quite a while, he was the go-to actor, especially there in the early 80s, for roles like that.
Yeah, and actually he had a very successful career in the 90s.
And he's directed some movies as well, too.
Yes, he has.
I was a big fan of Disclosure with him and Demi Moore. I don't think it's a great movie. It's a good popcorn movie. And I think that's what his movies were in the 90s, were popcorn movies where I could sit back, shut my mind off, and just enjoy what's on the screen.
I'll tell you what, he's had a resurgence recently. Have you guys seen the Kaminsky Method?
No, I've not seen that.
It is incredible.
Yeah, he was excellent in Ant-Man. But it's funny, Ken, because you brought up Disclosure. That's a Michael Crichton movie, and I have my assumptions that the only reason that got made is because of the success of Jurassic Park. Because after Jurassic Park, Michael Crichton became almost untouchable as far as a writer, and he started ER right close then as well.
If I remember right, correct me if I'm wrong, you might know, but Michael Crichton, didn't he write the book Coma?
He might have.
Which Michael Douglas starred in as well, late 70s.
So it's interesting that you brought up his films after, like, Jewel de Now. It starts becoming a chorus line: Fatal Attraction, Wall Street, Black Rain, The War of the Roses, which is like a black comedy. Those characters are not very likable. Basic Instinct, Falling Down. Like you said, kind of playing the villain or a very unlikable character. It's not till American President where he kind of like changes it up again. I also like him in The Game.
The Game is a very underrated movie. He and Sean Penn really do an excellent job in that movie.
And then you have A Perfect Murder, and then Wonder Boys, which I like Wonder Boys. And
I do too.
Traffic, but then after that, it kind of gets up and down. One Night at McCool's, I mean, Don't Say a Word is not bad, but then after that, it's just kind of all over the place. And we'll talk more about Mr. Douglas when we talk about characters. So Rob Reiner is known for being outspoken about politics. What are your thoughts about Rob Reiner and Aaron Sorkin and how they handled the issues of the day while still trying to make this movie?
It's no secret that Aaron Sorkin is one of my favorite writers, hands down. And him writing this movie is kind of like a predecessor to the NBC series The West Wing that aired from 1999 to 2006.
It's a complete predecessor to the West Wing.
I mean, same actors, just in reverse roles. I mean, and if you look at this movie and you watch The West Wing, you're going to see similarities that are just uncanny and incredible.
Because Eric Sorkin actually said in the first couple of seasons of The West Wing that a lot of stuff that he didn't use for The American President, he ended up using for The West Wing.
Which makes perfect sense when you're trying to, you only have, under 2 hours to do a movie, but you've got a series where you can just expand on things in your mind in elevating this president throughout his presidency.
Since we all watched The West Wing, what are your thoughts about how they handled the issues in the movie compared to how they handled the issues in the TV show?
One of the big comparisons that comes to my mind is, first off, the likability of a Michael Douglas and a Martin Sheen on The West Wing as president. I mean, no matter what your political stance is, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, a libertarian, you watch this movie, you watch that TV show, and you can't help but like the president. You might not agree with his politics, you might not agree with his staff or the way he's performing, but Aaron Sorkin, and in this case Rob Reiner as well, they make you really like the character. The character himself is someone that you can relate to. You're looking at the decisions he's making, and you're looking at it not as a political person. In this movie, there was the Clean Air Initiative. I mean, whether or not you agree on how Clean Air is done, that's here nor there. But the way that it's moved through this movie is done beautifully. It's not very confrontational. It's not in your face agenda. Rob Reiner is not pushing his agenda in your face the whole entire movie, where you're done with this movie going, what the hell did I just watch? It's done subtly. It's done, I think, openly. It's done pretty much where it kind of goes on both sides of the fence, where you're not really coming out of this movie angry. You're coming out of this movie liking it.
I agree with a lot of what you said there, Eric. Sorkin does something with, especially the role of the president. I don't want to say it's an idealized version of what a president should be, but it's definitely our opinion of the presidency has changed so much. It really harkens back to a time where people liked the president. And there wasn't this hatred that we live with now, or the demonization of one party over another, or tribal. Everybody has their own tribe that they're a part of, and the other tribe is evil. What I found most interesting, and if you go back and you watch episodes of The West Wing too, we're talking about the American president came out in 1995, and one of the major issues that they're talking about is a clean air initiative. And we're talking about greenhouse gases, and they're talking about carbon emissions, for lack of a better term. That's what they're talking about.
Pretty ahead of their time, huh?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about things that, to make us feel really old, almost 30 years on, this is one of the most pressing issues of our time, is what type of world are we going to leave our kids based off of climate change and carbon emissions? That's pretty amazing. Sorkin had to have had his finger on the pulse of what was coming down the road in a real big way. I know when we discussed A Few Good Men that he was a bartender, so he would have probably had access to people who were in the know, especially if he was bartending in Washington, D.C.
Darren Sorkin, I mean, he makes another cameo in this movie, similar to the one in A Few Good Men, where he's at the bar having a drink. I'm wondering if he's typecast right now as somebody who's
Yeah.
a raging alcoholic or something. But
the other thing that's brought up here in this movie is Sydney, played by Annette Bening. She works for a political action committee. Nobody knew what a political action committee really was until the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court, which opened up free money to flow into our elections. And now everybody has, they're called PACs. Everybody has a PAC now. That's how a lot of the money gets funneled into the campaigns for president and down the ticket. I mean, these are things that they're talking about. And ironically enough, this is an environmental PAC or lobby, because that's essentially what a PAC is, that is environmental in nature. I know that both Sorkin and especially Reiner, they tease around the liberal politics, but this environmental lobby, especially the head of it, played by the great John Mahoney, they're the bad guys here. They're not played off as doing anything with their quote-unquote their liberal hearts. These are people who are calculated. John Mahoney's character even mentions, he goes, if the president passes a clean energy bill that we didn't sign off on, our influence is done in Washington, D.C. So they're definitely set up to be the bad guy or protagonist in this movie. It's interesting when you look at this movie through the lenses that we have today. It's pretty amazing the foresight that Sorkin had in writing this.
not only does it have like a foresight, but it tackles the issues that are talked about today. The movie plays well now, 25 years later. The issues are still at hand. So this is not a dated movie. We're still talking about the guns and getting the guns. So some of these issues that they have brought up in this movie, these are still issues that we're faced with today. Probably something that we'll be faced with 25, 30 years from now. So
these are all issues that are never going to go away.
Yeah, I completely even forgot to mention the handgun, and they're talking about assault rifles. We're still talking about now.
I love the passion that Michael J. Fox's character, Lewis, is. He's very passionate about getting the guns. It doesn't matter which side you are on that, as far as this podcast goes, at least. But I just love the way that he expressed how important it was to him. Like everybody else in the room basically kind of blew it off because it wasn't something that was reasonable. But for him, it meant everything. And in fact, that's how the movie starts off, is that he drops the handgun part of the speech that he gave. Throughout the whole rest of the movie, Lewis's main thing is about getting the handgun assault rifle issues back on the table.
Yeah, these are issues that played out for the next 30 years. And you talk about Michael J. Fox's character. He formed his character based off of George Stephanopoulos, who was the speechwriter and domestic.
Okay, because I thought he was like the best friend to Big Bird in the Sesame Street series.
Yeah, no, George Stephanopoulos, he came to prominence when Bill Clinton won his presidency in 1992. He and James Carville became, there's a real famous documentary.
That dude is creepy looking, James Carville.
Yeah, he's not aged real well. I don't know if he's been sick.
No, he was like that in the 90s.
But
that Southern Louisiana drawl.
The Raging Cajun.
Raging Cajun.
But George Stephanopoulos, he was Bill Clinton's director of domestic policy and speechwriter. And so Michael J. Fox, you could tell that his relationship with the president was very similar to that between Clinton and Stephanopoulos at the time, because they didn't always agree. And it ended up with Stephanopoulos leaving his job for the president.
This thought just came to my mind. Michael Douglas plays the president, and he has to go to stop an airline strike, which Martin Sheen's AJ character advises him of. It's a Wall Street reference.
Reference, yeah.
Yes, because if you go back to Wall Street, Michael Douglas and Martin Sheen are in a meeting with airline strikers.
It also harkens to the time in the 80s when Ronald Reagan
air traffic controllers.
Diffused a similar situation.
Diffused them, he fired them all.
Well, yeah.
Depends on how you look at it, I guess.
That's one way to diffuse it, I guess.
Kind of weakened the union with that happening.
Well, that's a different podcast.
It's a way different podcast.
Podcast.
And that's one of the things that I really found that I enjoyed with this movie. It didn't shy away from having real life. Eric, when you had talked about in the Roger Ebert review, this is the first thing that came to my mind, and why I had to say something was because it's real easy to make up a fake crisis or a fake issue for the president to have to deal with. They didn't shy away from anything here. They put real issues on the table that faced America in real life. And I think that's to the benefit of the movie. It makes the movie more real, if that's possible.
But it's also real ballsy.
Well, it is, but it makes the movie feel more real. And I think that if they had made up some bull issue or...
like a made-up country with a made-up conflict.
Exactly. Yeah. I guarantee you I don't have the same opinion of that movie that I have of this movie. I would be 100% different for me. Because that's part of it. It's part of what brought me into the movie. If you want those sort of things, those made-up tropes, those movies are out there, and they're just not that good.
The only problem I see, though, with a movie like this and bringing up those issues of that day is you don't get the other side of the issue at all. And I think it works a lot better in The West Wing, where there's more of a balance. In a movie, it's hard to focus on that balance because, well, you're trying to tell a love story, first of all. In the end, it's all about Shepard and Sidney getting together and overcoming the odds of having a relationship in a political world. Because of that, it's hard to really balance those issues in a movie. I think Rob Reiner does the best he can in that situation.
It doesn't get bogged down in rhetoric. Like, other than knowing the 20% of reduction of greenhouse emissions, other than that, they don't get bogged down into any other, because that's another way to hurt the movie, is all of a sudden you get really bogged down into the minutia of that issue. It gives you, hey, she's going for 20%, he wants 10%, and that's that. So you're not getting the whole policy debate or anything of that nature.
And that's kind of like what I was saying. It would get bogged down in politics. You'd be
big
like...
time.
Yeah, the agenda would be pushed on you.
Oh, yeah, it would turn into real preachy.
You said it perfectly, Ted. One wants 10%, one wants 20%. That's the issue. Let's move with it.
Exactly. And Michael J. Fox's character wants guns to be part of the crime bill, and they don't think it can get passed.
You fight the fights you can win.
Right. It never gets bogged down into those debates because, like what you were saying, Ken, you don't see the other side. There's really no other side to show because they set out the point: the president good, lobbyist bad.
President and his relationship with Sydney is the good. Everything else around it is kind of bad at the moment because it's interfering in their relationship. The lobbyists are bad. The Republicans are bad. Even to a certain extent, even his staff.
It doesn't really come out and say Republicans bad, though, either. The only time you really see anybody come after the president is the guy who's going to run for president against him.
Which you would expect anyway.
Who happens to be a Republican. If you didn't have any idea of party, you wouldn't know that Michael Douglas was a Democratic president until Richard Dreyfuss's character is identified as a Republican. You wouldn't have any idea. And I think that is brilliant because you're going to lose one way or the other if you try to make that, especially in today's day and age that's full of crap.
The thing is, they focused more on his human qualities than if he's a Democrat or Republican. And I think that's why it works on the West Wing as well, especially earlier on in the West Wing, is the fact that this is a human being that has to make extraordinary decisions. One of the most gut-wrenching scenes is when he has to order to bomb Libya.
Right.
And he knows he's going to kill people who have nothing to do with the crisis. It's going to be janitors, people that work the overnight shift. He says, "You've seen the least presidential thing I do." To me, that hit me hard. When I watch a movie like this, it makes me think and appreciate our presidents that had this job because they have to make decisions that are so hard and so gut-wrenching. It has to take a special person to do that.
Right. And it's funny because this movie keeps getting referenced in what would be through the political specter. The whole idea of the president killing a janitor late at night, this is brought up in real life when, after one of the embassy bombings in the late 90s, Bill Clinton, in retaliation, bombed an ammunitions making facility. And that was the debate of how many people were going to be working there that night. That shaped his retaliation for the embassy bombing. That's a real life connection to how the movie connected to like a real decision that a president had to make.
With the general, he's sitting there with the president and they're talking about bombing that building. And the president, asks how many people are in the building. And he goes, "We've been over this before." Like he wants to get to the actual bombing. And in the movie, President Shepard doesn't have any military experience. And they try to point that out. I think it's very interesting that, again, what a president has to go through that doesn't have, let's say, military experience, what he has to overcome. There's a lot of things that this president has to overcome, which makes me ask the question here, do you think Andrew Shepard is too nice?
I don't know. They have to advance the character and make him likable so that you can root for him to get the girl at the end of the movie. If we were doing a presidential procedural movie, I don't think that President Andrew Shepard would be the prototype that we would use for that movie. But for this movie, yes, he fits exactly what he is needed to be.
What would you classify this movie? Is this a romantic comedy? Is this a political drama? How would you classify this movie?
It's a romantic comedy more than it is a political drama, but it's a hybrid of both of them.
It does make me laugh a few times. The thing that gets me to laugh every time is when his daughter plays Hail to the Chief as he's walking out the door on the trombone. It's more of just a romantic movie. It's just a romantic drama. That's what this movie is it's a drama.
As far as the comedy in it, it's not laugh out funny, but where I think I get little chuckles and stuff are the facial expressions. Shepard's facial expressions when he's interested in Sydney. You look on his face and you kind of smile because he's falling in love. And you look at her face and she's got the puzzled look. She has the puzzled look multiple times throughout the whole movie because she's confused on what's happening. The president is asking her out. He asks her if he wants to get a donut and she's just like, "What's going on here?" But you're smiling because it's awkward. You're enjoying seeing it all play out as far as the romantic comedy portion of it, if you want to say it's a romantic comedy. Which makes me ask this question here. What do you guys think about the chemistry between Annette Bening and Michael Douglas?
I like the chemistry between them. I think Michael Douglas, he sets it up well. I mean, obviously he is infatuated with her from the first time he meets her. and she really could care less. She's just agenda focused on the clean air initiative. But I think she eventually just falls in love with him. And I just like the way it kind of works its way through the movie. You know, all the pitfalls and the mountains you got to climb over. I mean, let's face it, a widowed president is something we have never had in recent 20th century. I think we did have one widowed president, but it's
Wilson.
can't remember.
I can't remember if Wilson got divorced or if she'd die. We did have a bachelor president as well.
Didn't he
Was
say
that-
in the movie that Wilson not only was a widower, but he also formed the League of Nations?
Yeah.
He used Wilson as an example.
He courted a girl, the wife forming the League of Nations.
Well,
So-
think about it. It's an interesting premise. You have a widowed president who is lonely and he falls in love with a woman. I mean, it's not a typical date. I mean, that's the kind of the premise of the movie is, you know, he hasn't dated since probably he courted his wife before she died. He's got to go through all these hurdles, figure out what he needs to do. Ordering flowers is just like a huge ordeal. Things that we take for granted, he can't do. And that's kind of the funniness of the movie.
I don't want you to get me a girl, AJ.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
this is not Vegas. Yeah.
The one-liners are the best. The one-liners are great in this movie.
I'm glad that they play it the way they do. As far as those things go, like, because I guess then it turns into a little bit of a fish out of water type of thing. That could easily become cheesy, if you understand what I'm getting at. As far as him asking somebody out, it could really turn to cheese, and it never does. It plays itself just serious enough that you're like, yeah, I could see exactly how this could really be a problem that a president would face in that case.
Right. I think it's because he makes fun of the idea itself. So
He's
while they're
deprecating.
Yeah, he's making fun of the situation, and she even says, "You like to make fun of this," and I think that helps us believe it a little bit more. I think there's maybe a little bit cheese on top, but it's not overboard. And I really like the progression of the relationship because it is awkward at first, and it should be awkward. It shouldn't be I always have a hard time with, and not saying that this can't happen, but a lot of relationships
fall in love kind of thing.
Exactly. I like the idea that it's first awkward and that they feel a little, especially her, doesn't feel easy because first of all, he goes, let's talk somewhere where it's a little less intimidating. And he brings her to the Oval Office.
Right.
and
Right.
talks to her.
The most intimidating place in America.
I love where it starts off because, like I said, he's interested in her before she's interested in him. And she actually starts to like him more and more as she gets to know him instead of being an instant relationship. So that's what I like about that. I think it progresses really nicely in a movie of this length.
And that's one of the things that we really haven't touched on yet. They never really do sacrifice her individual character in any way. She still is a strong character throughout the movie. She's never played like a secondary character or that she doesn't have substance. Because that would be an easy thing to do as far as a movie like this would be like, oh, well, now she's his girlfriend, so we don't have to take her seriously in anything she does anymore.
The only problem I had was probably with Sydney and Leo discussing the relationship with the president. He's accusing her of having sex with him and she's fighting back. But then when the ham comes in, she does turn into like the prom queen that he doesn't want to see. I think
ham.
it's a Virginia ham.
Virginia ham, right.
She gets all giddy, and to that I thought it took a little bit away of her character where she still should have been fighting. Just for a brief moment there, I felt like it belittled her character just a tad, but not through the whole movie, it didn't.
I think there's acting choices that were made there that might not have been the best. I don't know if it's necessarily the writing. It's hard because John Mahoney, even though he's, not one of the most powerful actors out there, he's a strong actor.
He's a big stage actor.
He's playing this, whereas he's the bad guy. And he's really putting pressure on. I don't know if the choices there were necessarily the correct ones to make because she does come off as a little bit of doe-eyed girl that's falling in love type thing. But pretty much the rest of the movie, she's right there. But I think it's that one scene. I think there was some choices made that I probably wouldn't agree with. And we've talked about this in every single Rob Reiner movie. It's casting. He brings an amazing cast to this. And John Mahoney, he brings somebody who has heft to that role. And the moment you see him, you automatically know that his character's serious because you've seen him in other things where he's been super serious. I think that's what happens in that scene. That would be the only scene I probably would have changed. I would have liked to have seen other takes of that particular scene.
Originally, they were going to have him read the note from the president out loud to her. That would have been an interesting take on it. I would like to have seen the battle from there, because I think then her reaction wouldn't be that of a high school crush all of a sudden on the president. I also have a problem a little bit later on when she's fidgeting with the pencil. That's the only time when I think the movie's a little forced. When she's just playing around with the pencil and he goes, "What, you got a hot date or something?" And then, she
the snap cut to the White House. I understand that, but I also you sympathize with her character because she's being asked to come to the White House and essentially go on a date with the president. I can't imagine how terrifying that prospect would potentially be. Of everything that she does, I believe that. Because I'm sitting here going, yeah, I'm sure you'd be fidgeting all day and you'd be probably throwing up in the bathroom.
I love the phone call, though. When the president phone calls her to ask her out, and she thinks it's like a colleague that's pretending to be Alan Shepard.
That's a thing that's done in a lot of comedies and definitely in like sitcoms and things like that.
It's done really well here, though. But because they aren't comedic actors. Neither one of these two are real comedic actors. These two are more fall on the more serious side than the comedy side. I've never really been a Annette Bening fan for the most part. I think I liked her in The Grifters, but outside of that, I've really never been much of a fan of hers. But in this movie, I buy everything that she's basically doing. You sympathize with her because of the awkward situation that she's in. Not only, is it awkward to be asked to go on a date with the president, but the relationship with the president kind of interferes with the job she's trying to do. And she knows it, and he knows it, and they pull it off extremely well because they're extremely likable. I said this before in other movies, and we talked about this with Harry Met Sally. For me, chemistry is everything, and I think these two nail it. At the end of the movie, you believe that they should be a couple. Like I said earlier, I think the progression, the ups and downs are perfect. I don't see there's a place here where I thought they could have spent more time with this or less time with this. I thought everything was kind of handled perfectly when it came to their relationship.
Hard to argue with that.
I agree with everything you said there. And as far as Annette Bening as an actress, I mean, if you look at her body of work, I really liked her in her Academy Award nominated role in The Kids Are All Right. I thought she was brilliant there. She was also really good in Bugsy. And she was in the remake of A Love Story with her husband, Warren Beatty. And I thought that movie was really good too.
So I didn't like that one. I didn't like it. Maybe because it's a remake, and remakes are hard to like because you're comparing it to other movies.
I think I liked it a lot because I hadn't seen the original when I saw that one. And I like Warren Beatty and I like Annette Bening. I enjoy it. It's a good movie. I can't remember something where actually of hers that I said, you know what, she doesn't fit.
She was great in American Beauty.
Oh, yeah.
Totally forgot about that.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, we'll touch that movie eventually. What are your thoughts about some of the other performances? Is there another performance in this movie that you just have to talk about?
I like the performances of Martin Sheen and Michael J. Fox as kind of like co-stars in this. I think their chemistry working with Michael Douglas, all three of them together, when they're kind of in the room talking, I think it's really great. I think Martin Sheen actually sets himself up well for actually portraying the president in The West Wing. I think him growing up, the backstory, obviously, he was best man at Shepard's wedding. They've been best friends for years. I think the chemistry between them really works. And then that kind of awkwardness of Michael J. Fox, his acting style is always, he's kind of like just very awkward. He's always feels uncomfortable when he's doing something. That's just his shtick. That's what his acting style is. I think it really works well in this movie together.
Yeah, when I think of Michael J. Fox in this role, I think of Family Ties because it's basically him growing up.
Pretty much.
Except Michael P. Keaton was a
Republican.
A Republican and loved Reagan.
Yeah.
But the way he delivers the role is very similar. The mannerisms
are right there.
I give Michael J. Fox a lot of credit here because at this particular time, he's already been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and he's been hiding it from his roles. And I read somewhere, I think he was taking some medication because his left hand would be shaking. And in fact, if you watch some of these scenes, and I happen to notice this, he puts his left hand in the pocket in some of these scenes where there's no reason for his left hand to be there. And I'm wondering if that had anything to do with it. But he does great here. Every time he's on, I'm loving it. I really enjoy Michael J. Fox, and I'm frustrated that Parkinson has took Michael J. Fox away as far as more acting opportunities, because he could have really developed into something great as far as, and I mean, he's still a great actor, but I mean, we were robbed in seeing more brilliant performances.
Yeah, it's one of those great unfortunate things that's happened. Michael J. Fox is really good here, and of course Martin Sheen's really good. But like I said before, this ensemble cast, I believe it's Mrs. Chappell, his one secretary, that's a famous actress. And you had David Paymer, who played Leon. He's also an amazing actor. You had the supporting cast, and like I had said earlier, this is something that is a hallmark of Rob Reiner. He puts together these casts. There is no such thing as a small part with a Rob Reiner movie, because the people that he chooses to bring into the movie to play these parts that are considered quote unquote small are actual actors that have depth and really have credentials that are to be admired.
I think he gets away from this a little bit after this movie, because when I watch other movies like The Bucket List, it becomes just two actors. It doesn't have that ensemble cast. It doesn't have other people playing strong roles. And I think that's hurt his movies maybe after Ghost of Mississippi. For me, Ghost of Mississippi might be the last very good Rob Reiner film. I think there's a couple of good Rob Reiner films, but we're coming at the end here of his very good films. And I think it's because he does get away from that. In every movie we reviewed in this podcast of Rob Reiner's, it's perfectly cast. Every single movie we've reviewed so far. Because in other podcasts that we've done, we've talked about, oh, what if this person would have played this person? Or what if we thought of other options that could have been better? That's not really the case with these four movies that we looked at, especially the supporting roles. In fact, we talked about The Princess Bride. Everybody in The Princess Bride seemed to be on equal footing. The leads are not outshone. I think that's just so well balanced between the performances that you can love everybody and not have to particularly single really anybody out. Martin Sheen does a great job. I would have loved to have seen more of Martin Sheen. The only problem I have with the AJ character at all is why doesn't he quicker to tell Shepard to stop being a butthead and go after Rumson?
And that's another character. You have this smallish type of part, and it's played by Richard Dreyfuss. Holy smokes. If they're casting this in modern movies now, like today, a relative nobody's going to get that part. It's not going to be somebody like Richard Dreyfuss, who is a good actor. Some would say even a great actor. But it's that. You're exactly right on everything you said, Ken. He brings these casts together, and these are all super high quality actors. You can't overlook anybody, and you're right. Everybody is on the same playing field. One of the things that I saw when doing some research, and I guess it's something that I always just took for granted, Martin Sheen wasn't nominated for Best Actor for Apocalypse Now. I don't understand that at all, just as a side note.
I think a lot of these characters could be interchangeable. I mean, I could see other people playing different parts. You know, we talked about John Mahoney. He could probably have played AJ. Martin Sheen could have probably played Leo. There's a lot of people here that they're so talented. This is such a talented cast that you can mix and match and move these people around, and you can buy it. You really could because of their acting chops.
I could definitely see Martin Sheen, obviously, as the president, because we obviously have the West Wing reference. But in this case here, I could definitely still see him. And I can see Michael Douglas in Martin Sheen's character.
I could see Richard Dreyfuss actually playing AJ, too.
Very easily.
Very easily. Definitely.
I wish there was more Richard Dreyfuss in this movie. I wish his part was a little bit bigger, but at the same time, that's not the movie. The movie is...
It's a different movie. That's what I was just going to say. That's a different movie. Now we're getting into political drama.
I guess I would have loved to see them in the same room talking to each other just once. That would have been maybe just a little interesting, but at the same time, this is one of those movies where I just say, there's nothing I really would have done differently.
I would have liked to see a debate between them, to be honest with you, like a first round of debates. I think would have been cool.
The way things were trending, they were still far out from actually getting to the debates. The movie ends at the
It's kind of like around January or
it's the State of the Union address is what I was trying to say. The movie ends at the State of the Union. That's going to be late January, early February. So they're still a long ways away from there. But it seemed like the impression that you were supposed to get was that the speech that Michael Douglas made that morning before the presidential press corps, that pretty much put the screws to Richard Dreyfuss's character. And a side note, and not to try to bring in today's political theater, for lack of a better term, the speech that Michael Douglas gives when he's defending Sydney, that was used in 2015, 2016. It was used by Ted Cruz to defend his wife against former President Donald Trump. And one of those ironies of life, Ted Cruz is a huge Rob Reiner fan, and he loves The Princess Bride, and he obviously knows the American president. That's an interesting aside. This movie has found its way into the social and into real life in a way.
As does The West Wing, much of Aaron Sorkin's work.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's the West Wing that made people want to watch The American President, or it's The American President that made people want to watch The West Wing. Either way, they're very enjoyable because of the fact that we get to see the human side of... Because I think, and I said this maybe a little bit earlier, one of the issues that I seem to have is I don't look at our presidents as human beings, but they are. They're human beings. They're no different as far as feelings go than any of us. They might have gone to a higher educated school. They have, of course, different career paths than we do, but they feel just like we feel. And I think we forget that, and we forget how, I don't know if any of us would really want that job. That job of being the president, we see how people age. And granted, they age no matter what between 4 to 8 years. But when you see some of these photos of the presidents before and after they took in office, you could see that life has beaten them down. I don't know why anybody would want to be president more than 2 terms. It just seems it would have sucked the life out of them.
Amazingly enough, one of the only people that came out of the presidency that looking the same, he ended up dying as in president, was Franklin Roosevelt. Imagine the pressure that he was under. But yeah, if you take a look at the 3 of the most recent, if you look at the before and after pictures of Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama, it looks like they aged 30 years in those 8 years as president.
And it's funny because after that, if you look at pictures like 3 or 4 years later, they look like they're a little bit younger.
Yeah, Obama now, he actually kind of looks almost his age. And same with George W. Bush. Bill Clinton has had some illnesses. I think that's why he looks the way he does. No, they age really quick. It's the pressure. It's the weight of that position, because you go from citizen to now you know exactly what type of danger we live under on a daily basis. It has to be overwhelming.
You brought up Franklin Roosevelt. One thing I really love about the Shepard character, I love his character because of the fact he loves history. When he talks to his daughter about social studies, and he talks about, makes her read preamble of the Constitution, she, of course, doesn't want to, but he gets all excited. This is a page turner. He's very excited, but he's quoting history left and right throughout this whole movie. He's very excited that his daughter is going to be in a mock Congress. I loved it because of the fact that when we are younger, people who love history, and Ted, you probably can relate with this because I know you love history yourself. We get excited and we really enjoy that. And just to see a political character get excited about the American history, it just takes me to another level. It makes me want to say, why isn't all politicians like that? Why isn't all politicians embracing our American history and loving America? Because you could see that he loves America because he's so invested in the history of America.
And that is the writing of Aaron Sorkin, who makes you fall in love with this fictional Michael Douglas and this fictional Martin Sheen in West Wing. You actually want these guys as your president.
Right.
When I watch The West Wing, I'm like, I want Martin Sheen as my president. I want that character.
There are a couple of cuts to speak to what you're saying, Ken. There's a couple of cuts in the movie. One of the things that Rob Reiner uses a couple of times is the famous painting of John F. Kennedy. and where he's got his head down. That's a hugely famous portrait of him. And Reiner uses that a couple of times in cuts to give you that illusion that this is kind of the character that they're going for. I agree. Martin Sheen's character says it to him. He said, without me, you would have been the most popular history teacher at the University of Wisconsin. It's obvious that he has that level of respect and humbleness in front of the history that he's facing.
He has passion for history, and I think that's what I love about it. The only thing I don't like about Shepard, he's a Packers fan. I mean, we all can't be perfect, I guess.
I was waiting for someone to bring that up.
In the course of studying history, and especially in college, I knew teachers who had that same passion for the history. It has to be intrinsic. It has to come from you. You have to want and have that desire to have it that makes that unique. And when you see somebody that does have it, it's infectious. It gets into you and you feel it too. My mentor in college was that way. He was brilliant. It's infectious, and it makes you want to like him. And you're right too, Eric. It's Aaron Sorkin. Aaron Sorkin has a way of creating these characters, and he did it for how many seasons of The West Wing? Is there like 8 or 9 seasons of The West Wing?
99 to 2006.
Yeah. He did do all those
He didn't
years.
write them all, of course. He created a cast of characters, and he has this uncanny ability to make his characters feel real. Even when he goes to where the subjects are real people, like in The Social Network, where he's trying to make Mark Zuckerberg look human, he does make him human in a way. And I think that's a real testament to Aaron Sorkin. Now, of course, the Academy Awards nominees have not been mentioned yet in 2021, but he does the same thing in his most recent movie that I'm sure will be nominated for Best Picture, which is The Trial of the Chicago 7. Those characters come off the screen. And even though they're real people, he makes them feel real and relatable, and you understand the characters that are being played there. He's an extremely talented writer. He's a testament to movie writing.
And television shows as well.
Yeah, he's exceeded at both.
Didn't know this, but when I was reading, I guess William Retchert, sued the Writers Guild of America for not being credited on the screenplay of this film. He's claiming that Sorkin kind of stole or plagiarized some work.
Was he the original writer when Robert Redford was attached to the project?
I think it's that he wasn't a writer. I think he had a screenplay called The President Elopes, and I think he feels like they stole it from that screenplay.
Well, if he did, he should have had a better title for his movie.
Yeah, The President Elopes is pretty bad.
That sounds like a horrible, horrible comedy.
Interesting you brought up Robert Redford, and that's somebody we're going to review some of his movies moving forward in our next Spotlight. He's not our Spotlight, but he happens to be in a couple of those films. He was also credited as a producer on this film. But I could not see him play this character. I can't see him be Shepard. I think it would have been a different film altogether. I don't think it would have been what we would have seen.
Right, because that's why he left the project, was because of his differences with Sorkin and Reiner, because he wanted it to be more love story rather than political theater. And in that case, it is a completely different movie. If he didn't have his heart into it, I'm glad he didn't follow through, because it really does look like Michael Douglas wanted to do the role, because he brings a life to the character that feels real. I mean, Robert Redford is Robert Redford.
I kind of like where the age is probably right here in 95 for this character, because he's about 51, which is kind of young for a president. 51 is definitely young for a president.
Well, compared now, when we have 2 octogenarians running around trying to be president.
Yeah, but even before that, we haven't had many presidents in their 50s. Most of them have been in their 60s.
Most of those in our lifetime have been old farts, except for George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. And now we've got President Biden, who's
112.
He's over 80. And when Donald Trump was president, he was in his 70s too.
I think it's the right choice for age-wise, because I don't know if a romantic comedy or romantic drama or however you want to put this movie.
Nobody wants to see old people having a romantic comedy.
I think it just works better that you went with a younger lead here, and especially with Annette Bening. I mean, they've done this 1,000 times with age differences being like 20, 30 years. I was watching My Kiss and Vinny the other day, Marissa Tomei and Joe Pesci. I mean, the age difference there is 20-something years, and it's like, am I really buying this? They were great in the film, but there's always going to be that, okay, am I buying this age difference? But I think they made the right choice here, and Michael Douglas just does a great job, and I don't, like I said, there's nobody else I could see here unless you have Martin Sheen playing the president. I think Michael Douglas has romantic leading man look than Martin Sheen does.
Well, Martin Sheen obviously played Kennedy in several made-for-TV movies, obviously. So you can see a Martin Sheen playing a presidential role. But maybe in 95, when this movie came out, maybe you really couldn't see a Martin Sheen as president.
Right, at this particular time, because not funny you say that, because every time I see Martin Sheen and I think about him being the president in The West Wing, I think of Corey Feldman in The Goonies when he looks at a coin and they're calling out presidents, and then he says Martin Sheen, and they're like, Martin Sheen. They look at the coin and said, that's Kennedy, and he's like, same difference. He played Kennedy.
Interesting.
Well, how about Martin Sheen when he was running for president in the Dead Zone?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
There's your totally evil president there.
You're right.
He's typecast.
Totally.
Typecast as president.
I mean, if you think about Martin Sheen in the 70s, Martin Sheen is a very good-looking man who could probably pull this off. But yeah, I'm 95. He's just a little bit, he's not old, but it's just his look is no longer of a leading man look. We talked about a lot of great things about this movie. It sounds like we really are on the same page, possibly, of this movie. Is there anything about this movie that we haven't talked about that you didn't like?
I'm trying to think of something I really don't like in this movie. It's a romantic comedy / political drama, more on the romantic comedy. It's pretty much everything you expect out of it.
I can't really put my finger on something that just sticks out. That's
there's nothing really that stands out that I would be like, I would have changed that.
There's only two things that I will bring up. Like, for instance, they're in the limousine, the screen that they use. So like when they're driving and you're looking out, and it looks bad. It looks so fake.
So the green screen is pretty fake, pretty bad?
Yeah, the green screen is so bad in those pictures. I even think it's bad when the helicopter, his ride comes. It kind of looks fake. It looks photoshopped.
Bad CG there.
Usually that's something that I would pick up on, but I don't know. I guess
I got to rewatch it, honestly, now and look at that.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I don't want to watch it and see it now. Thanks,
I
Ken.
think that actually says a lot, though, about the actors, then, for you, because of the scene. They're talking about the flag burning and how they could have stopped it from becoming a bigger thing. And maybe you're so in...
Yeah, I'm concentrating on the writing. I'm interested in those characters. I'm not caring as much about the CGI. It's a movie that I get lost a little bit in as far as that goes.
Which is totally ironic for me, because I love cinematography, and I didn't even catch that.
Thanks, Ken.
It's like being on a simulator roller coaster ride, basically.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I never paid attention to it that much in this movie.
When you watch it for the 100th time, I guess, you start noticing these little things about this movie. And then I had mentioned before, the only other problem I have with this movie is AJ's character. Why isn't he stepping in and telling Shepard that he's messing up? He allows him to go down to a 41% approval rating, and at no time does he tell Shepard that he should engage and fight back these accusations against his girlfriend and his presidency.
Here again, if you start to go down that road, you're getting into presidential procedural movie rather than romantic comedy. It's to increase the tension, but then it's also set to highlight the grand scene at the end where he makes the speech and he lights into the Senator Rumford or Mumford or whatever his name is.
Rumsfeld.
Yeah, well, it builds that to where you want him now to go after him. And finally, when Martin Sheen's character says he agrees with Michael J. Fox's character, you need to go after him. If we're talking reality, of course, there's no way in hell that they would ever let a president go from the 63% approval rating, which no modern day president, I think, will ever sniff that.
It builds up that finale where the hero's down at 41%. He's going to make a comeback and there's going to be a great finale and an ending. You know it's coming.
He's on the ropes. He's going to make the comeback. Because, like I said, it's a different movie. This is one of those movies, and I think, too, we had this a little bit with A Few Good Men. If you start to nitpick and take out the little things, you're changing the movie. This is a movie that does remarkably well around the main story, and it doesn't get itself bogged down by any of that. When I approach the movie, I'm not getting bogged down into the minutia like that, because now you're taking the movie into a different way, and we're not going to like that movie. I have this gut feeling I wouldn't care for the movie because now you're changing things.
Can have him question on him on why he's doing, maybe not command him to do it, because you do have Sidney asking him why he's not doing it. You have everybody else asking him why he's not doing it. I think it wouldn't be terrible for your chief of staff to tell you occasionally, like, why aren't you doing this? Maybe have that conversation, not have it all of a sudden at the end. Maybe have it sporadically here and there.
You know, it's one of the crazy things as far as like how my crazy head goes. This movie shaped how I thought about what the chief of staff is as to a president, like in a weird sort of way. I thought that that's how Andy Card was to George W. Bush. For the longest time, I've always thought that was the relationship between the chief of staff and the president. Crazy little anecdote of my own.
Well, kind of add that to it with the West Wing. With the West Wing's chief of staff, he kind of does the same type of stuff as AJ does. The West Wing is just an extension of the American president without the romance part of it.
Yeah, it's just one of those weird little things, how a movie can shape how you look at different things. I don't know.
What really got me too was the lines in this movie. I had quoted a line at the beginning of the podcast. It was longer, but I wanted to keep it short because I didn't want it to go into a speech at the beginning of our podcast. When he says this line, we've had presidents who were beloved, who couldn't find a coherent sentence with two hands and a flashlight. People don't drink the sand because they're thirsty. They drink the sand because they don't know the difference. Man, those type of lines just hit me hard in this movie. That, and when I talked about America isn't easy, I used America is advanced citizenship. I use that when I teach Sunday school. Sometimes I will say being a Christian is advanced citizenship in the kingdom of heaven. It's not easy. Having things that we want should not come easy. We should fight for them. But at the same time, we need to respect each other and understand that we're all in this together. And somehow I think we all lose that somewhere, because if it's not my way, it's the highway type of deal. And I like this movie because of the fact that those speeches, those lines apply to all of us. It doesn't apply to Democrats or Republicans or Christians or atheists or educated people, non-educated people. It's everyone. And that's why I think this movie works well for me.
There was a quote in one of the articles I was reading about the American president, and this is a testament to the movie. And the quote that I took from the article, it assumes that the relationship between the president and the people itself is in a way a romantic one. The American president insists that the connections that the government and the governed are primarily emotional. It believes that politics caters most readily to those Americans who, as Stephen Colbert put it, know with their hearts. That's one of the things about the movie that I think Andrew Shepard's character brings that. What you said, Ken, is right. This is tough. Being an American is not easy. You have to be invested in a certain way. You quoted the response to the part that hit me the most, which was Michael J. Fox's character. And I don't want to go off on today's political landscape, but it hit me so hard. Quote was, "People want leadership, Mr. President. And in the absence of genuine leadership, they'll listen to anyone who steps up to the microphone. They want leadership. They're so thirsty for it that they'll crawl through the desert toward a mirage. And when they discover there's no water, they'll drink the sand." That quote for me hit so hard. I almost had to stop the movie for a second. Nothing more can be said that is truer than those words. People are looking for it. This movie's hard not to look. And I mean, yes, is this an idealized version of what the president is and who the president is? Yeah, it is. But like with some other political movies, is it wrong to expect your president to live up to some of those ideals?
No, it's a movie. It should, of course. It's a
It's so
romantic
hard.
comedy. You have to have a good feeling. You have to have a positive person. You can't have an evil person as your main character in a rom com or however you want to classify this movie. So yeah,
Well, it's like Sydney's sister says the man is the leader of the free world. He's brilliant, funny, handsome. He's above average dancer. Isn't it possible our standards are just a tad high? I think there's that expectation that the president is higher than everybody else. It's not that he's higher than everybody else, it's that he has a job to do. And his job is very, very important. He still is a human being. He still makes mistakes. Let's go ahead and try to wrap this all up here with some final thoughts and reviews. Eric, do you have a grade and a review for us for The American President?
Ken, I really like this movie. I like Aaron Sorkin, no secret there. I love Rob Reiner, no secret there. I think this is a well done movie. I love the acting in this movie. I love the plot. Pretty much love everything about this movie. The one thing that prevents me from giving this movie an A, and this is not the fault of the movie, this is more on me. When it comes to Aaron Sorkin, I like a political movie. I like something that is a hardcore political drama. And when it comes to Aaron Sorkin, I really just don't want a romantic comedy wrapped up in a political drama wrapper or vice versa. I really would have liked to seen this movie more as a predecessor to The West Wing, a real political drama. Now, as a romantic comedy, this movie is an A, clearly, no question about it. But for me, I really would have liked to seen this more as a political drama. And that's no fault of Rob Reiner, Aaron Sorkin. That is clearly on me. So for that, I'm giving this a B plus.
Thank you, Eric. How about you, Ted?
This movie, I agree with a lot of what Eric just said there. This movie hits every note for me. Like I had mentioned earlier, I can get lost in this movie. I can sit down for the hour and 45 minutes and put things aside and get lost in the story. And I think that's kind of one of the things that I look for in the movies a lot, is to have that experience. Like I just previously said a little bit ago, it was hard not to compare today's world with what's going on there. And like Eric said, I have to remind myself that this is a romantic comedy. And on that level, I enjoy it a lot. I can't argue with Michael Douglas and Martin Sheen. I mean, the casting of the movie is impeccable, like we had discussed at length.
It's top tier.
Yeah, there's nothing I would really change. I struggled to even come up with something that I didn't like. As far as giving it a rating, that's a little tougher. I don't want it to come off as anything negative, but I would give it an A minus. It's not one of my top 50 movies, probably.
I'm pretty surprised you're giving it an A minus, to be honest with you.
It's a movie that I'll come back to and I'll watch. I'm surprised that it took me this long because I'll be perfectly honest, this is a movie that before we had decided that we were going to spotlight this movie, I hadn't watched the movie in at least 10 years. But now, after doing this and discussing it and looking at it, I found a newfound love for the movie. Probably never going to enter into top 50 or 75 movies in my list, but it's going to be there and it's going to be a movie that when it's on the shelf, I'll go pick it out and I'll go watch it. And I highly recommend anybody going to watch it, especially if you want to escape from the doldrums that we're in the landscape that we're living in now. It's a real good way to escape for at least an hour and 45 minutes.
It is a great feel good movie. I mean, you watch the whole movie. That's a great point. You're looking at it from the eyes of 1995.
That's another huge thing for me is, do I feel good after watching the movie? I don't want to watch a movie that makes me feel bad. I use this as a comparison. There's a movie a couple years ago. The actor Casey Affleck won for Best Actor, who was Manchester by the Sea.
Very depressing.
That movie made me so sad after watching it. To this day, I don't think I'll ever watch that movie again. And it was a brilliant movie, but I'll never watch it again because of the effect that it had on me. And that's the complete opposite of what like this movie does. I feel better after watching it, and that's a huge thing for me.
If I'm remembering right, Ted, you did say this. Initially, when we were talking about Rob Reiner films and we were going to do The American President, you were kind of like, you weren't really on board, were you?
I wasn't. It's a movie that I hadn't seen in a long time. And to be honest, Stand By Me is one of my favorite Rob Reiner movies. Rob Reiner wasn't the director that I chose. It was Ken's choice, and the movies that he picked were all really good. It's hard when we're choosing these movies from these directors because these are directors that we love. Therefore, they're movies that we like.
This will be a problem that that I will be encountering next week.
Right? Further down the line, when I get to choose again, it's going to be difficult, especially if I come across and I do somebody like a Tarantino. Really? I've got to pick 4 out of those 8 movies that are some of my favorite movies of all time. It's tough. But yeah, I wasn't really on board with this movie, but I'm glad that we did it now because I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Like I said, that's probably why I gave it an A-.
It was interesting trying to figure out which director I was going to go with for my first choice for this podcast. I had sat on Frank Capra for a longest time because, as you both know, I'm a huge Jimmy Stewart fan, and I do like Frank Capra movies immensely, especially It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Rob Reiner is a huge Frank Capra fan. In this movie, Frank Capra's grandson is the first assistant director on this film. And I think Ted had mentioned to me earlier today that he was also first assistant director on A Few Good Men. I see a lot of Frank Capra in this movie. We didn't touch base that they mentioned it in the movie when Sydney is actually coming to the White House for the meeting. And she says that she's trying to get the Casper-esque feeling. I get that Capra feeling in this movie. This is a movie from when I first saw it on for the next maybe 5 or 6 years. It was on a continuous rotation. Every time that it was on, I was watching it. And I will have to admit, over the last 5 or 10 years, I've kind of gotten away from it. There were so many movies to choose from with Rob Reiner. I love The Princess Bride. I love A Few Good Men. When Harry Met Sally was something that I knew that Eric loved very much. Kind of threw a bone there at Eric to review that movie. But there's also This Is Spinal Tap and Stand By Me and The Sure Thing. It Goes to Mississippi. There's a lot of good movies here that Rob Reiner has done. And I'm happy we ended with The American President. And it was nice to see it again because, as Ted says, it makes you feel good. And you actually are rooting for these two. The chemistry is wonderful. To be honest, and I know you both were big fans of When Harry Met Sally, but I actually like the progression of this love relationship better than When Harry Met Sally. Just because we get to see it build and we get to see the payoff more in this movie than maybe When Harry Met Sally. And there's just this ensemble cast that's just amazing. You have Martin Sheen, Michael J. Fox. Every time Michael J. Fox was on screen, he stole that scene. He was just amazing. Every time he came on, all of a sudden I was like, oh, good, Michael J. Fox is here. And again, like I said earlier, it's a shame that a disease like Parkinson's has robbed us from more performances from him. As far as a grade goes, this one has been hard for me to give. I almost want to rather have a scale of 1 to 10 than an alphabetical scale. Like same with When Harry Met Sally. This movie for me is a B+, though it's really teetering towards that A-. There's just other movies, like Ted had stated, it's not in my top 50, and I feel like a top 50 movie for me or a top 100 movie for me is my A movies. And this falls somewhere probably more of between 100 and 200. I've seen, and Ted's seen, and I'm sure Eric has seen a lot of movies, and we're talking about thousands of movies. So to have a movie that falls in between 100 and 200 is saying a lot about a movie. I'm really happy that I was able to revisit this movie, and I'm very happy we were able to pick Rob Reiner because I think, as we have stated multiple times, when he selects a cast, and especially since This Is Spinal Tap all the way through, maybe, in my opinion, Ghost of Mississippi, I don't think he makes much of a wrong move. People say North is pretty bad. North is not as bad as people say it is. Give it a shot. It's not that bad. What I like about these movies that we did is they were different. Even the romantic comedies, When Harry Met Sally and The American President, they're different. The settings are completely different. I mean, you could say Princess Bride is a romantic comedy fantasy, but it's different. He's not retelling the same story over and over and over again like other directors can do with the same subject matter. So that's it for me. I appreciate you guys with this journey with Rob Reiner. So Eric, why don't you give our audience what's coming up next on our Director Spotlight?
Our next episode will be a spotlight featuring the director Sidney Pollack, and we will be reviewing one of his first movies, the 1973 release, The Way We Were, starring Robert Redford and Barbra Streisand.
See, Robert Redford came up again.
Going to come up probably several more times.
So Ted, where can people find us on Twitter?
You can find us at Twitter at at movie_marquee with 2 E's.
We also are on Facebook, the Movie Marquee. Feel free to like us on Facebook and join our community. We try to have discussions, and feel free to leave us a message. You can actually go to Anchor. Our podcast is from Anchor, and you can actually go to the Anchor site and leave us a message. Just go to Anchor, look up the Movie Marquee, and right there's a message button. You can go ahead and leave us what you think about the podcast. You might even have an opportunity to be put on the podcast with what you have to say. We actually have Justin, who actually gave us a little bit of his Miracle Max from The Princess Bride, which you heard at the beginning of the podcast. So thank you, Justin, for contributing that. But we look forward to hearing from you, because we want to make this podcast better for you guys. You have to listen to us three for an hour 10, however long it seems to be. And whatever makes it enjoyable for you, we would love to hear about it. So on that note, I want to thank you all for coming, and we will see you next time at the Movie Marquee.
Take care, everybody.
See you at the movies.